Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. I'm Mark Mansour, attorney and longtime Democratic activist, and like you, someone who still believes democracy is worth fighting for. On this show, we don't just describe the problems, we search for real solutions. Today we're tackling one of the biggest questions of our era. How do democracies pull themselves back from the brink when authoritarianism is on the rise? Over the past decade, we've watched as democracy has come under attack, not just from foreign adversaries, but from within. Leaders with authoritarian instincts have gained ground in nations once thought stable. But in just the last 4 years, Poland and Brazil have shown us that the slide toward authoritarianism can be stopped. Not by waiting for perfect candidates, but by using a new hard-nosed playbook for democratic resistance. Let's break down what happened and what America can learn. Let's start with the reality. Democracy is fragile. In recent years, we've seen leaders who undermine courts, attack the free press, and erode the rights of minorities. This isn't theoretical. It's happening in real time in places like Poland and Brazil, countries that not long ago were held up as models of democratic progress. In both countries, the warning signs were clear. Ruling parties dismissed constitutional checks, painted dissent as treason, and used disinformation to divide the public. It's a playbook that should sound familiar to anyone watching American politics today. But here's the twist. In both Poland and Brazil, citizens and opposition leaders found a way to fight back and win. Let's look at Poland. For years, the Law and Justice Party, known as PiS, led by Jarosław Kaczynski, systematically undermined the judiciary, restricted media freedom, and targeted minorities. By 2023, many feared Poland was on the verge of entrenched authoritarianism. The opposition was battered and divided. The search for a perfect candidate had led nowhere. But then something changed. Instead of waiting for the ideal leader, Poland's opposition parties built a coalition of dissent. Donald Tusk, an experienced but polarizing figure, became the face of this movement. He wasn't everyone's first choice, but he embodied a broader, unified anger. The opposition stopped trying to win over diehard PiS supporters. Instead, they spoke directly to those who felt isolated and afraid under the regime. Their message: you are not alone. This approach, recognition over conversion, was the catalyst for change. Opposition groups ran ads and organized rallies that validated the pain and frustration of those sidelined by the regime. They didn't waste time trying to convert the other side. They focused on breaking the spell of isolation and building solidarity. When the 2023 elections arrived, the opposition's unity paid off. They unseated PiS and halted Poland's slide toward authoritarianism. Now let's talk about Brazil. In 2018, Jair Bolsonaro, a former army captain with a flair for authoritarian rhetoric, came to power. His presidency was marked by attacks on democratic norms, environmental devastation, and pandemic denialism. By 2022, the opposition faced a daunting challenge: how to unseat a populist incumbent with a fervent base. The country was polarized, poverty was rising, and many Brazilians felt a profound sense of loss. But the opposition, led by former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, didn't try to play it safe. They didn't chase after elusive swing voters with bland centrist appeals. Instead, they acknowledged the pain and anger that defined Bolsonaro's Brazil. They validated people's frustrations and built a sense of collective dissent. When it mattered most, the opposition unified. Disparate voices came together around a simple, coordinated message: enough. They embraced the language of rebellion, not respectability. And when the votes were counted, Brazil's democracy had survived. So what do Poland and Brazil teach us? The old playbook, polished ads, triangulation, and chasing swing voters, no longer works in an area of narrative warfare. Today's information ecosystem is saturated with disinformation, polarization, and manipulation. The goal is not to convert the other side, but to recognize and rally those already hurting, afraid, or angry. Authoritarian regimes isolate dissenters by making them believe they're alone. The new strategy is about recognition, making people see that their pain and anger are shared. Dissent ads, viral videos, and grassroots organizing break the spell of isolation. In both Poland and Brazil, the opposition embraced the language of rebellion. They spoke to the urgency of the moment and the moral clarity of standing up to power. When election season arrived, the opposition unified with remarkable discipline. Petty differences were set aside. The message was simple, direct, and coordinated. This is our last chance. Join us. Let's talk about the environment where these battles are fought. Today's information ecosystem is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Social media amplifies outrage, algorithms reward division, and disinformation spreads at lightning speed. Authoritarian-leaning leaders have adapted. They exploit division, weaponize fake news, and turn every disagreement into an existential crisis. If defenders of democracy hope to win, they must adapt too. That means recognizing that the fight is not just at the ballot box, but in the stories we tell, the communities we build, and the solidarity we foster. Let's hear from those who were there. In Poland, activists described the moment they realized they weren't alone. One organizer said, "We stopped trying to convince PIS voters. Instead, we focused on the people who were scared, who felt abandoned. We told them your pain is real, and you're not the only one." That changed everything. In Brazil, a campaign volunteer recalled, "People were angry, but they also felt powerless. We gave them a way to channel that anger, not into violence, but into voting, organizing, showing up. We made dissent visible." These stories remind us that democracy isn't just an idea. It's something people do, together. So what does all of this mean for the future of democracy? First, it means letting go of the fantasy that a perfect candidate or a perfect moment will come along to save us. Democracy is messy. Coalitions are imperfect. But unity, however fragile, is powerful. Second, it means recognizing the pain and anger around us, not dismissing it or wishing it away. These emotions are real, and they can be harnessed for good. Third, it means organizing that pain and anger, giving people a sense of belonging, a reason to hope, and a way to act. And finally, when the time comes, it means unifying, setting aside differences, focusing on what matters most, and speaking with one powerful voice. That means that here in the United States, progressives must let go of slogans and focus on explaining the positive positions they support to independence with clarity and emotion. For self-described centrists and moderates, it is time to stop mischaracterizing, undermining, and demonizing progressives. This is self-destructive and serves to undermine instead the policies with which we all agree. If you're listening to this and wondering what you can do, start by looking around. Who feels isolated? Who is afraid? Who is angry? Reach out. Listen. Recognize their pain. Then organize. Find others who share your concerns. Build communities, online and offline, that can resist division and disinformation. And when the moment comes, whether it's an election, a protest, or a conversation, unify. Speak up. Show up. Make your voice heard. Democracy's enemies have adapted. It's time for defenders of the democracy to do the same. Poland and Brazil are not perfect. Their struggles are ongoing, but their stories offer a roadmap for anyone who refuses to give up on democracy. Stop waiting for the perfect candidate or the perfect moment. Recognize the pain and anger around you. Speak to it. Organize it. And when the time comes, unify it into a single powerful voice. The future of democracy depends on it. Now let's take these stories further and dig into the practical lessons. How the victories in Poland and Brazil can be turned into actionable steps for anyone who cares about democracy, whether you're an activist, a voter, or just someone worried about the direction of your country. One of the most powerful lessons from both nations is the necessity of building broad-based coalitions, even among groups with deep ideological differences. In Brazil, Lula da Silva made headlines when he chose Geraldo Alckmin, a former political rival from the center-right, as his running mate. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a signal to the country that defending democracy was more important than old grudges. In Poland, opposition parties coordinated closely, even though they ran as separate entities, to maximize their collective impact under a proportional, representative system. The message for Americans is clear. unity over purity. Pro-democracy groups should prioritize alliances that bring together liberals, conservatives, centrists, and independents who share a commitment to democratic norms. This means developing joint platforms that focus on defending democratic institutions, even if consensus on other issues is limited. It also means rotating leadership roles among coalition members to prevent infighting and ensure all voices are heard. Both countries showed that civil society is a critical bulwark against authoritarianism. In Poland, the legacy of solidarity, a movement that began with workers in the Gdansk shipyards and grew into a mass social force, remains instructive. In Brazil, civil society groups, academics, and business leaders organized public demonstrations and issued joint statements defending democracy, such as the massive gathering at the University of Sao Paulo in 2022. The lesson here is to foster independent organizations, support unions, professional associations, and community groups that operate outside state control and promote democratic values. Launch public campaigns and educational programs that teach the importance of democracy, rule of law, and civil liberties. And crucially, establish legal defense funds and rapid response networks to support activists facing harassment or legal threats. Brazil's experience highlights the importance of resilient institutions, especially independent courts and electoral commissions. The Supreme Federal Court and the Superior Electoral Court played decisive roles in curbing Bolsonaro's authoritarian moves, using legal tools to combat disinformation and protect electoral integrity. These institutions acted swiftly, banning candidates who abuse power and ordering the removal of false content. For Americans, the takeaway is to advocate for reforms that insulate courts from political interference and guarantee tenure for judges. Equip electoral commissions with the resources and legal authority to counter disinformation and ensure fair elections. And consider, as a last resort, using legal mechanisms, such as banning anti-democratic parties or criminalizing incitement to violence, judiciously and only as necessary to protect the democratic order. Now, we know that the judicial system in the United States is compromised. We know that the Supreme Court is against us, but we need to find a way to move for the lower courts to make decisions that will help the process along. It is utterly urgent that we support the lower courts and continue to fight against the Supreme Court and against the effort to try to support Trump's authoritarianism and bring about a dictatorship, one that Trump wants, one that Trump needs, and one that Trump is doing his very best to inflict on us. A defining feature of the new resistance playbook is the shift from conversion to recognition. Rather than wasting energy trying to persuade hardened opponents, pro-democracy forces in Poland and Brazil focused on validating the pain, anger, and fear of those already alienated by authoritarian rule. This approach broke the spell of isolation and built solidarity. That's why it's so important to run recognition campaigns, use social media, advertising, and public events to communicate directly with those who feel marginalized, sending the message, "You are not alone." Amplify voices of ordinary citizens who have suffered under authoritarian policies, making dissent visible and relatable. And build support networks. Create safe spaces, online and offline, where people can share experiences and organize collective action. Another vital lesson is the value of message discipline and strategic communication. Both countries' opposition movements succeeded, in part because they maintained message discipline. When the stakes were highest, leaders set aside minor disagreements and rallied around a clear, urgent, and coordinated message. This is our last chance. Join us. For activists and organizers, this means developing unified messaging, agreeing on core talking points, and avoiding public disputes over secondary issues during critical campaigns. Invest in media and communications training for activists and leaders to ensure clarity and consistency. And establish rapid response teams to identify and debunk falsehoods in real time. Mobilizing voters and expanding participation is also key. Both Poland and Brazil saw surges in voter turnout, especially among young people, women, and marginalized communities. driven by the sense that democracy itself was on the line. The opposition's focus on recognition and solidarity energized these groups and translated into electoral victories. The lesson for Americans is design outreach strategies aimed at youth, women, minorities, and rural populations. Advocate for reforms that expand access to voting, such as early voting, mail-in ballots, and accessible polling places, and celebrate civic engagement. Recognize and reward communities that achieve high turnout or significant increases in participation. Winning an election is only the start. Both Poland and Brazil face the difficult task of restoring democratic norms and repairing institutions damaged by years of authoritarian rule. In Poland, the new government must decide how to address unconstitutional laws and personnel installed by the previous regime, balancing the need for legal continuity with the imperative to restore the rule of law. This means conducting institutional audits, reviewing laws, appointments, and regulations enacted under authoritarian governments, and repealing or amending those that undermine democracy. End state capture of public broadcasters and ensure independent oversight of media regulation. Investigate abuses of power and hold perpetrators accountable, while avoiding witch hunts that could deepen polarization. There are also cautionary lessons. In Poland, the opposition's victory was enabled by a proportional representation system that rewarded coalition building. In countries with winner-take-all systems, similar strategies may be harder to implement. In Brazil, the aggressive use of legal tools to defend democracy raised concerns about judicial overreach and the balance of power. So advocates for electoral reform, where feasible, push for systems that encourage coalition building and fair representation, and ensure that extraordinary legal tools are used only as long as necessary, with sunset provisions to prevent permanent distortions of the constitutional order. Above all, promote a political culture that values pluralism, debate, and peaceful transitions of power. The stories of Poland and Brazil prove that democratic backsliding is not inevitable. When citizens, civil society, and institutions unite with discipline, creativity, and courage, the tide can be turned. But the work doesn't end with an election. Rebuilding trust, restoring institutions, and renewing democratic culture require patience, vigilance, and a willingness to learn from both victories and setbacks. If you care about democracy, here in America or anywhere else, take these lessons to heart. Build alliances, empower your community, defend institutions, and never underestimate the power of recognition and solidarity. The future of democracy depends not on perfect leaders, but on ordinary people acting together with extraordinary resolve. Thanks again for joining me on America's Fractured Politics. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's something we build together.